The scream tore through the silence of the lake like a knife through flesh. I bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, the darkness of the cabin suffocating me. It was 2 a.m. and something was wrong, terribly wrong. My name's Lila, and I'm 16, stuck in a creaky upstate New York cabin with my dad, Mark, and 2 strangers he invited without warning. Evan and Caleb, a gay couple from the city. Dad said it was just a weekend getaway to bond and broaden my horizons. But the tension in the air felt like a storm brewing. That scream, it wasn't just fear. It was raw, primal, like someone's world had just shattered. I stumbled out of my room, the wooden floor cold against my bare feet. The cabin smelled of pine and damp earth, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes. Downstairs, the living room was lit only by the dying embers of the fireplace. Evan, 28, with his sharp jaw and kind eyes, stood frozen by the window, staring out at the lake. Caleb, 29, blond and wiry, was pacing, his hands shaking as he muttered something I couldn't catch. Dad was nowhere in sight. "Lila, go back to bed," Evan said, his voice tight, but I wasn't a kid anymore. I could feel the weight of whatever had just happened. "Where's my dad?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I meant. Caleb stopped pacing, his eyes darting to Evan, then to me. "He's outside," he said, barely a whisper. Something's out there." I didn't wait for more. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter and pushed past them, ignoring Evan's protests. The screen door creaked as I stepped onto the porch, the night air biting my skin. The lake was a black mirror, reflecting nothing but stars. Then I saw him, Dad, standing at the water's edge, his silhouette rigid. He was holding something, a piece of paper, crumpled in his fist. I called out, but he didn't turn. The scream had come from him. The cabin was Dad's pride and joy, a rickety old place he'd bought after Mom left 5 years ago. He called it his reset button, a place to escape the chaos of Syracuse and his dead-end accounting job. I hated it. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me, the bugs, and Dad's endless lectures about finding yourself. This time, though, he'd blindsided me. "I invited some friends," he'd said casually on the drive up, like it was no big deal. Friends? Evan and Caleb weren't his co-workers or fishing buddies. They were a couple, openly gay, and Dad had never mentioned knowing anyone like them. I didn't get it. Dad was a church-going guy, the kind who quoted scripture at Thanksgiving. Why them? Why now? When we arrived, Evan and Caleb were already there, unloading groceries from their beat-up Subaru. Evan was all charm, shaking my hand with a grin that made you want to trust him. Caleb was quieter, his eyes scanning the trees like he was expecting trouble. They were city guys, Brooklyn, they said, here for a weekend of nature and good company. I wasn't buying it. Dad's smile was too forced, his jokes too loud. Something was off, and I felt like the only one who noticed. That first night, we sat around the fire pit outside. Evan told stories about his job as a social worker, helping kids in foster care. Caleb, a graphic designer, sketched the lake in a notebook, his pencil moving like it had a life of its own. I watched them, trying to figure out their deal. They weren't flashy or loud, just normal. But the way Dad kept glancing at them, like he was waiting for something, made my stomach twist. I asked to go to bed early, claiming a headache. Truth was, I needed space to think. Back to that scream. I reached Dad by the lake, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaking. He turned, his face pale, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. The paper in his hand was a letter, old and yellowed, with handwriting I didn't recognize. "Lila," he said, his voice breaking, "I need to tell you something. About me." About everything. Before he could explain, headlights sliced through the trees. A truck was pulling up the dirt road. Fast. Evan and Caleb appeared behind me, their faces grim. "Mark," Evan called. "Who else did you invite?" Dad's jaw tightened. "No one," he said. But the truck stopped, and two men stepped out, their shadows long and menacing in the moonlight. One of them held a flashlight of his own, pointed right at us. "Mark Thompson," he growled. "We need to talk." My heart was in my throat. The men weren't locals. They had city accents, rough and clipped, like they'd stepped out of a crime show. The taller one, maybe 40, wore a leather jacket and had a scar across his cheek. The other, stocky and bald, carried a duffel bag that looked heavy. I grabbed Dad's arm, but he didn't move. "Stay calm, Lila," he whispered, but his voice was anything but calm. Evan stepped forward, hands raised. "Hey, we don't want trouble," he said, his social worker tone kicking in. The scarred man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "This ain't about you," he said, his eyes locked on Dad. "Mark owes us something. Ain't that right, Mark?" I looked at Dad, waiting for him to deny it, to say this was a mistake. But he just stood there, clutching that letter like it was his lifeline. Caleb pulled me back toward the cabin. "Lila, get inside," he said, his voice low but firm. I didn't budge. "What do they want, Dad?" I asked louder this time. The bald man smirked, dropping the duffel bag with a thud. "Your daddy's got secrets, kid. Old ones. Bet he didn't tell you about his college days." "Huh? College days?" Dad never talked about college. He'd always said it was boring, just numbers and textbooks. But the way these guys were looking at him, like they knew something I didn't, made my skin crawl. Evan stepped closer to Dad, his voice steady. "Mark, what's this about?" Dad swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the letter. "It's complicated," he said. "I thought I could fix it this weekend. With you two here." I thought his voice trailed off, and for the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes. The scarred man stepped closer, his flashlight blinding me. "You thought wrong, Mark. Time's up." I didn't know what they meant, but I knew one thing. This weekend wasn't about bonding. It was about something Dad had buried long ago, something that had just clawed its way back to the surface. The night air thickened with tension, the kind that makes your chest ache. I stood frozen by the lake, Dad's silhouette trembling under the glare of the stranger's flashlight. The letter in his hand seemed to burn, its secret screaming louder than any of us could. "Lila, go inside," Dad said again, his voice barely holding together. But I wasn't leaving him. Not now. Not with these men staring him down like wolves circling prey. The scarred man, who introduced himself as Vince, took another step forward. "You gonna tell her, Mark? Or should I?" His voice dripped with menace, but there was something else. Amusement, like he was enjoying this. The bald guy, Tommy, stayed silent, his eyes scanning the cabin like he was casing the place. Evan and Caleb flanked me, their presence steady but tense. "Whatever this is," Evan said, his voice calm but firm, "you don't need to involve the kid." Vince laughed, a sharp bark that echoed across the lake. "Kid's already involved. She's his daughter, ain't she?" Blood don't lie. My stomach churned. What did that mean? I looked at Dad, waiting for him to say something, anything to make this make sense. But he just stared at the ground, the letter crumpling further in his fist. "Lila," Caleb whispered, his hand on my shoulder. "Let's get you inside. We'll figure this out." His voice was soft, but I could hear the strain. He was scared, too. I shook my head, planting my feet. "No, I'm staying." Dad's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. There was something raw in them, guilt, maybe, or shame. It made my heart twist. Vince smirked. Fine, let's all have a little chat, then. He gestured toward the cabin, and Tommy picked up the duffel bag, following like a shadow. We moved inside, the creaky floorboards groaning under our weight. The fireplace was dead now, the room cold and dim. Dad sat on the couch, still clutching the letter, while Evan and Caleb hovered near me, their protective instincts clear. Vince leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Tommy dropped the bag on the floor with a heavy thud. Start talking, Mark, Vince said. Tell him about Syracuse University, 1998. Tell him about us. My breath caught. Syracuse University? That was Dad's alma mater, but he'd never mentioned anything about 1998. Not friends, not parties, nothing. I always thought he was just a boring accounting major who kept his nose in books. But the way Vince said us made it sound like they'd been more than classmates. Dad's hands shook as he unfolded the letter. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I was different back then, young, scared. I didn't know who I was. He glanced at Evan and Caleb, then at me, his eyes pleading. Lila, I never wanted you to find out like this. Find out what? I snapped, my patience fraying. What's in the letter? Who are these guys? My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. Evan stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm like he was trying to anchor me. Caleb's eyes were locked on Dad, searching for answers. Dad took a shaky breath. In college, I was involved with someone. A guy. The words hit like a punch. My dad? The guy who went to church every Sunday, who grumbled about modern nonsense. I couldn't process it. His name was Ryan, Dad continued, his voice barely audible. We were close, too close, but I was terrified of my family, of what people would think. So I ended it. I pushed him away. Vince's face darkened. Pushed him away? That's a nice way to put it. He stepped forward, his shadow looming over Dad. You didn't just end it, Mark. You ruined him. Ryan was my brother. And after you broke his heart, he spiraled. Dropped out. Disappeared. You know what happened to him? Vince's voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw pain behind his anger. He's gone. Overdose. 2001. The room went silent, the weight of his words crushing us all. I stared at Dad, waiting for him to deny it, to say it wasn't his fault. But he just sat there, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear, I didn't know. Caleb broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. Mark, why are we here? Why invite us? Dad looked up, his face a mix of guilt and desperation. I thought if I could show Lila, show myself that I'm not that person anymore, that I could accept people like you, like Ryan, it would make things right. I thought this weekend could fix it. Evan's jaw tightened. Fix it? Mark, you can't undo the past by inviting us here like some kind of experiment. His words stung, and I could see Dad flinch. I wanted to scream, to run, to make this all stop, but I couldn't move. The letter in Dad's hand was from Ryan, I realized, a goodbye note written years ago that Dad had kept all this time. Tommy finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. We didn't come here to talk, Mark. Ryan left something behind. Something you owe us. He unzipped the duffel bag, revealing stacks of old photos, letters, and a journal. Ryan's things. You kept them, didn't you? After he died, you took his stuff to hide your secret. We want it back. I looked at Dad, my heart pounding. Is that true? I asked. He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. The cabin, the weekend, the invitation, it wasn't about bonding. It was about Dad trying to bury his past, and now it was unraveling in front of me. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the truth spilled out like blood from an old wound. Dad's silence was deafening, his hands trembling as he stared at the duffel bag Tommy had opened. The photos and letters inside were a time capsule of a life he'd hidden from me. A life where he'd loved someone, hurt someone, and carried the guilt for decades. I wanted to hate him, to scream at him for lying, but the pain in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't just my dad anymore. He was a stranger with a past I couldn't comprehend. Vince knelt by the bag, pulling out a faded Polaroid. It showed two young men, maybe 20, laughing under a tree. One was Dad, younger, carefree, his arm around a guy with bright eyes and a wide smile. Ryan. My chest tightened. I'd never seen Dad look that happy, not even with Mom. You kept this, Vince said, his voice thick with emotion. Why? To torture yourself? Or to pretend it never happened? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. I kept it to remember him, to remember who I was. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Lila, I didn't want you to hate me. I thought if I could be better now, if I could show you I've changed. His words trailed off, drowned by the weight of his guilt. Evan stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with frustration. Mark, this isn't about changing. It's about owning what you did. You hurt someone. You can't fix that by inviting us here like props in your redemption story. Caleb nodded, his eyes soft but firm. We're not here to make you feel better about yourself. You need to face this. For Lila, for Ryan, for you. I felt like I was drowning. My dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who tucked me in every night after Mom left, had a secret so big it could tear us apart. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. All these years, you let me think you were perfect. Dad's face crumpled. I'm not perfect, Lila. I was scared. Back then, I didn't know how to be myself. My family, the church, they made it clear who I was supposed to be. So I buried it. I buried Ryan. And I've been paying for it ever since. Tommy slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. Paying for it? You got a daughter, a house, a life. Ryan got nothing. You don't get to play the victim here. His anger was raw, but there was pain in it, too. I realized then that Tommy wasn't just Vince's friend. He'd loved Ryan, too. Maybe as a brother, maybe more. This wasn't just about Dad's past. It was about theirs. Vince stood, holding the journal from the bag. Ryan wrote about you, Mark. Every page. How you promised you'd stand by him. How you broke him when you walked away. You owe us the truth. Where's the rest of his stuff? The letters, the drawings, the things you took from his apartment after he died. Dad's head dropped. I burned them, he said, his voice hollow. After I got the news about Ryan, I couldn't handle it. I thought if I got rid of it all, I could move on. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. Vince's face twisted, and for a moment, I thought he'd hit Dad. Instead, he threw the journal at him, pages fluttering like wounded birds. You burned his life, Vince said, his voice shaking. You erased him. Caleb stepped between them, his hands raised. Enough, he said. This isn't helping anyone. Mark, you need to make this right. Not for us, not for them, for your daughter. He looked at me, his eyes steady. She deserves the truth. I didn't know what to say. My world was unraveling, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I grabbed the journal from the floor, my hands shaking as I opened it. Ryan's handwriting was messy but beautiful, full of sketches and poems. One page caught my eye, a drawing of Dad, young and smiling, with the words Mark, my forever written beside it. My throat closed up. This was real. Dad had loved him, and he'd destroyed him. "Lila," Dad said, reaching for me. I pulled away, clutching the journal. "Don't," I said. I need to think." I ran outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The lake was still, but inside me, everything was chaos. I sat on the bench by the water, Ryan's journal in my lap, trying to make sense of a father I no longer knew. Evan followed me out, sitting beside me without a word. After a moment, he spoke, his voice soft. "I know this is a lot, but your dad, he's trying. He's messed up, but he loves you." I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes. "Why did he invite you guys?" "Really?" Evan sighed. "I think he wanted to prove something to you, to himself. Maybe he thought seeing us would make it easier to tell you the truth." I stared at the lake, the journal heavy in my hands. "I don't know who he is anymore," I whispered. Evan nodded, his eyes kind. "Sometimes people hide parts of themselves to survive, but that doesn't mean they're gone. Your dad's still your dad. He's just human." The stars above the lake felt like they were watching me, judging me, as I sat clutching Ryan's journal. Evan's words echoed in my head. Your dad's still your dad. But they didn't ease the ache in my chest. The man I'd known my whole life was a lie, or at least a half-truth, and I didn't know how to fit this new version of him into my world. The cabin door creaked behind me, and Caleb stepped out, his silhouette soft against the porch light. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, like he was approaching a scared animal. "No," I said, my voice raw. "I don't even know what okay is anymore." Caleb sat on the other side of the bench, giving me space but staying close. "I get it," he said. "When I came out to my family, it was like dropping a bomb. Everything I thought I knew about them, about myself, changed." I looked at him, his blonde hair catching the moonlight. "Did they accept you?" I asked. He smiled, but it was sad. "Eventually, but it took time, and a lot of hard conversations." I opened the journal again, flipping to a page with a poem. Ryan's words were raw, full of love and pain, written for a man who'd chosen to hide rather than fight. "Dad loved him," I said, almost to myself, "and he left him. How do you do that to someone?" Caleb's eyes softened. "Fear makes people do things they regret. Your dad was young, Lila. He wasn't ready to face the world as who he was. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human." Inside, I could hear raised voices. Vince's anger, Dad's broken replies, Evan trying to keep the peace. The cabin was a pressure cooker, and I wasn't sure how much more it could take. "What do those guys want?" I asked, nodding toward the cabin. "They said Dad owes them, but what does that even mean?" Caleb hesitated, then sighed. "I think they want closure. Ryan was Vince's brother, and Tommy, I'm guessing he was more than a friend. They're hurting, and they think your dad's the key to making it stop." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "But hurt doesn't fix hurt. It just makes more." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to run back inside and demand answers, but another part wanted to stay out here, where the lake was quiet and the truth couldn't touch me. Before I could decide, the cabin door flew open, and Vince stormed out, Tommy trailing behind. "We're done here, Mark," Vince shouted, his voice carrying across the water. "You don't get to hide anymore." Dad appeared in the doorway, his face pale but determined. "Vince, wait," he said, stepping onto the porch. "I can't give you what you want. Ryan's gone. But I can tell you the truth." Vince stopped, his back to us, his shoulders tense. Tommy looked at him, then at Dad, his expression unreadable. "The truth," Vince spat, turning around. You think that's enough? You broke him, Mark. You made him think he wasn't worth loving. Dad flinched, but he didn't back down. I know, he said, and I've hated myself for it every day since. But I'm trying to be better. For Lila. For Ryan's memory. I stood, clutching the journal, my heart pounding. Dad, what happened to Ryan? I asked, my voice shaking. The whole story. No more lies. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. Okay, he said, but it's not pretty. He told us everything. How he and Ryan met in a literature class, how their friendship turned into something more, how they'd sneak away to a park near campus, dreaming of a future they both knew was impossible. Dad's family was strict. His father a pastor who'd disown him if he ever came out. So when Ryan pushed for them to be open, to stop hiding, Dad panicked. He cut Ryan off, ghosted him, left him alone. Ryan dropped out a year later, spiraled into addiction, and died before Dad could make it right. Vince listened, his face a mask of grief and rage. You could have saved him, he said, his voice breaking. You could have been there. Dad nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Tommy stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. We don't want your guilt, Mark. We want what's left of him. His journal, his photos, those are ours. Dad nodded, handing over the journal I'd been holding. Take it, he said. It's all I have left. Vince took the journal, his hands trembling. For a moment, I thought he'd say something else, but he just turned and walked back to the truck, Tommy following. The engine roared to life, and they were gone, their headlights fading into the night. The cabin was silent again, but the air felt heavier, like the truth had settled into the walls. Evan broke the silence. Mark, you did the right thing. Telling the truth. It's a start. Dad shook his head. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. He looked at me, his eyes desperate. Lila, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. I wanted to forgive him, to say it was okay. But I couldn't. Not yet. I need time, I said, my voice barely audible. I turned and walked back to the bench by the lake, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Caleb followed, sitting beside me again. You'll get through this, he said. You're stronger than you think. I didn't feel strong. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. But as I looked at the lake, its surface calm despite the chaos, I realized something. Dad wasn't the only one who needed to face the truth. I did too. The lake was still as dawn broke, the first rays of light painting the water gold. I hadn't slept, and neither had Dad. He sat on the porch, staring at the horizon, his coffee cold in his hands. Evan and Caleb were inside, packing their things. The weekend was supposed to be a reset, a chance to bond, but it had cracked open a wound none of us could ignore. I sat on the bench by the lake, Ryan's journal gone, its absence like a missing limb. The truth about Dad, about who he was, who he'd loved, had changed everything. But it wasn't just his story anymore. It was mine too. I walked back to the porch, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. Dad looked up, his eyes red and tired. Lila, he started, but I held up a hand. I'm not ready to talk yet, I said. But I'm here. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a start. I sat beside him, the silence between us heavy but not empty. For the first time, it felt like we were seeing each other, really seeing. Evan and Caleb came out, their bags slung over their shoulders. We're heading out, Evan said, his voice kind but firm. Mark, Lila. This weekend wasn't what any of us expected, but it was real. That matters. Caleb looked at me, his smile soft. You're gonna be okay, Lila. Both of you. I wanted to believe him, but the ache in my chest said it would take time. Dad stood, shaking their hands. Thank you, he said, his voice thick, for being here, for everything. Evan nodded. Just keep talking to her, Mark. She's worth it. They headed to their car, and as they drove away, the cabin felt emptier, but not in a bad way. It was like the air had cleared, leaving space for something new. That morning, Dad and I sat by the lake, talking for the first time in hours. He told me about Ryan, not just the pain, but the joy, how they'd laughed over bad coffee, how Ryan's sketches had made him see the world differently. He told me about the fear that had driven him to hide, the shame that had kept him silent. And he told me about me, how I was the reason he'd kept going, even when the guilt was too much. I'm not perfect, Lila, he said, his voice steady now. But I love you, and I'm done hiding. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man who'd raised me, flaws and all. I love you too, I said, and the words felt like a release. We weren't fixed, not yet, but we were trying. That was enough for now. We packed up the cabin that afternoon, the silence between us softer, more honest. As we drove back to Syracuse, the lake fading in the rearview mirror, I thought about Ryan, about Vince and Tommy, about Evan and Caleb. Their lives had collided with ours for one chaotic weekend, and I'd never be the same. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something better, the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start healing. The cabin was behind us, but its ghosts would stay with me forever. Not as a haunting, but as a reminder. Love, in all its messy, painful, beautiful forms, was worth fighting for. Dad had learned that the hard way. Now it was my turn to carry it forward.